Hi, it's Matt, and I'm sharing with you some strategies that relate to the top 5 topics that teachers raise as concerns for their students. So as a school-based occupational therapist, these are some of the things that I would recommend for my students and the teachers that I work with. The next topic I want to address, that's a very common one, is encountering students who either reverse or invert letters or numbers. So they're writing their letters or numbers backwards. And what do we do about that? So there's a few things that you can try. First of all, it's important to note that once the students reach, near the end of first grade and getting into second and then especially third grade, a lot of the ways that students form letters is very ingrained by this point in time. So they've built up a lot of habits at this point, and that can be difficult to change. So it really does take a lot of work and a lot of really concerted effort to change the way students form their letters, but it can be done. So some of the strategies that I might suggest involve a lot of sort of backing up and practicing those letter formations very specifically, one at a time. So some of the things you can do, you can teach those letter formations in groupings according to similarities in letter formation. So what do I mean by that? For instance, lowercase letters like C, A, D, G, and Q are all formed by starting with a C stroke in the letter formation. So there's a similarity in the way that all of those letters begin. So you could teach those letters as a group and emphasize that C stroke to begin the letter, and then you would just teach the different ways that those letters end. And that's one way to just sort of emphasize letters in groupings by similarities in letter formation. That's one way that you can do it. You can go back and you can use different colors for the different parts of the letter strokes to emphasize the different parts of letters. I could sometimes do that with B and D reversals. That's a really common one. And you can sort of have a visual reference for the student that emphasizes the differences in those letters using different colors in the letters. Another thing is, as far as visual references are concerned, often I will make a small visual reference of the letters or numbers that particular student has difficulty with, and paste that right either on their binder or on their desk as a visual reference that's customized to them, that relates to just those letters that they're having difficulty with. Another thing that you can do is either something like rainbow writing, or what Handwriting Without Tears calls wet, dry, try. It's just different ways to trace over and over letters and some more fun ways to practice that letter formation over and over again in a sequence. So for instance, with rainbow writing, you might demonstrate a letter formation for a child and then give them a lot of different colors of crayon. You might have them just trace over the letter over and over using a different color each time. So you're using all the colors of the rainbow to trace over the same letter multiple times, and it sort of reinforces that letter formation multiple times in the same practice session. Handwriting Without Tears does something called wet, dry, try, which I really like, and that uses a small slate chalkboard, a piece of chalk, and a small piece of sponge that's wet, and a little piece of paper towel, and you would demonstrate the letter for the child, and then they would use a small sponge that's wet. They would trace over the demonstrated letter to wet the letter, and it erases it at the same time, and I think that's kind of fun, making the wet marks on the slate board. Then they would use the dry piece of paper and they would trace the letter again to dry it, and then they would try it. So they would use the chalk and they would write the letter themselves, and then you can repeat that process over and over. So they wet, they dry, and then they try. Another thing that you might want to do is just in general to reinforce left to right, top to bottom work habits. So these come into play with reading and with writing. So any chance you get, you want to just reinforce the fact that when reading and writing, we start at the top and we work to the bottom. We start at the left and we work towards the right. So some kids don't know the difference between left and right. It's a good idea to begin teaching that if the child doesn't know the difference between left and right. And movement activities are great for that too. You can do all kinds of movement activities, or Simon Says, or things like that reinforce all of those concepts: left and right, top and bottom, up and down, and all those other things like prepositions. The last thing that I would recommend is if you have an older child, you might want to look at typing as an alternative to writing if reversals are a really big issue. We have more and more access to technology in schools these days, and sometimes typing is a great alternative to printing. The other thing is you may want to consider teaching cursive as an alternative to manuscript printing. I've had some kids who have some real difficulties with letter formations and reversals specifically. Sometimes just teaching them cursive and sort of starting that right from scratch and teaching them a new way to write is often a savior for those kids. So hopefully one or more of those strategies are something that you can try in your classroom with your students, and I'd love to hear how it works out for you.